Good evening. I'm Socrates, Garrett, and we're broadcasting live from right here in Jackson, Mississippi, the heart of the Deep South, right here in the African-American-owned broadcasting studio. We believe digital.com, our own platform. And so it's critically important that in the African-American community, we control the narrative. I look forward to receiving opportunities to show and advertise your products for goods and services and to move your brand along in this community. We're broadcasting live on Facebook. On We Believe Digital Podcast, go to Roku and download our app, and We Believe Global, with shows like this to bring articulate, intelligent conversations and dialogue to our platform. So I'm here to continue sounding the alarm. This is how the South is going to rise again. Good evening, and welcome to Socrates Garrett Live. We're broadcasting live right here in Jackson, Mississippi, in the heart of the Deep South. The eyes of the world are on Mississippi tonight because tonight is election night. A lot of people are going to declare themselves winners, and you can't have a winner unless you have a loser. But the African American community's fate lies in the balance. And we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. Now, if you're watching us on Facebook, then share this program with your friends and family and send us stars. If you're watching us on YouTube, go on and subscribe to the program. We need your assistance and your help there. So go on and subscribe to the program and enjoy all of the benefits from being a subscriber. Now, if you're watching us on WeBelieveDigital.com, our very own platform, you'll know that we're a little bit different kind of organization. We are, in fact, a broadcast network. We bring you some of the best podcast shows and the content that you won't find anywhere else in the entire country. And then 24 hours a day, you can listen to We Believe Radio, where we have some of the best playlists in the country. Enjoy Southern Soul from 1 to 4, gospel running from 3 a.m. in the morning all the way up to 10 o'clock that next morning. We have wonderful talk shows on the radio station as well. You can catch Socrates Garrett live there. You can catch Dr. Eldridge Henderson there on talk shows in the morning and the evenings during drive time. So it's critically important that you find We Believe podcasts on YouTube and that you look us up on Facebook and that you follow us on Instagram, as we're shattering numbers and shattering records as being one of the fastest growing media outlets in the country. We're African American owned and operated, and we're proud of that. Once again, we want to demonstrate that African Americans, regardless to the disadvantage they might have found themselves in, can always find a way to excel. But you're not going to do it without sacrifice, and somebody has to pay the price. So we look forward to paying the price and removing some of the obstacles and the stumbling blocks out of the way of the generation that's yet to come. Now, my co-host is Dr. Eldridge Henderson. He's a man that needs no introduction, born on a plantation in the Mississippi Delta, and every time I think about that, I just get chills, understanding the difficulty associated with having such a humble beginning. Now, mine wasn't much better, but I was born up in eastern Madison County. Now, Madison County now is probably the most affluent county in the entire state of Mississippi. And that's because 90% of the blacks that used to reside there have lost their land and been pushed out. So we had a little bit better start. But Dr. Henderson didn't let anything get in his way. He fought his way through it, got off the plantation, got a great education, served his country, and now he is the co-host on We Believe podcast with Socrates Garrett, and he has his own show as well. Dr. Henderson, how have you been?
I've been doing well, sir.
Good seeing you.
Most certainly proud to be here again. You know, this is many months we've been working together. We might end up and share some information one of these days to the people throughout the world.
Doc, I'm looking at the comments and I'm looking at the number of people that are watching our shows, and I am really impressed. We are getting hundreds of thousands of views on our shows. I was struck just last week on the last show that Curtis Williams had called The Audit. And he had 350,000 views on that show.
Excellent.
And I know your show is producing a similar kinds of numbers. So we are growing, and the world is beginning to understand what we're trying to tell them.
So you were thinking that people are paying attention to the fact that if things continue the way they are going in the world, that there's definitely going to be fire next time?
Well, I don't know about the fire, nor do I know about the flood. So you said next time, so I'm not sure of which time you're referring to.
The end time, when we have all the major diverse problems worldwide, expect the fire. You've had the flood, so you don't have to worry about the flood anymore. And the fire is going to be more comprehensive than the flood.
Doc, I was looking at this series on planet Earth, and there's so many species, there are so many different kinds of animals, there are so many different kinds of plants, etc., until there's no way possible that I can capture in my mind how all of them would have got on a boat.
It never did happen, sir. That's figment of man's imagination. That never happened, and it's good to believe it if you want to believe it, but I'm telling you right now, it was just impossible for that to happen.
Figment of man's imagination.
Right.
Now, you know you and I are going to get in trouble, so we might as well, as John Lewis said, get in some good trouble.
Well, let me tell you, sir, I've been in trouble ever since the day I've been born. I've always had trouble, but I know how to accept it and work around it. It does not disappear all the time, but sometimes it's camouflaged, and when I move that cover, I see it again, over and over and over, but I don't let that control my life nor my future.
Well, Doc, let's get right on into this trouble. Now, I'm concerned that as a black man, I do not know who I am. I'm sitting here today, an educated black man, but I do not know who I really am. I do not know where I came from. I do not know who I'm related to. I do not know what my great achievements has been, my legacy has been. As an African American, I am somewhat lost and confused.
Well, let me tell you, sir, you're not the only one. And that's why black people throughout the world, including those in Africa, have so many psychological problems, why they have that, what I call self-defeatism, and why they hate themselves to the point where they want to change and be like others. And the last thing that we have is the lack of that knowledge you mentioned and don't know how to find it because it takes a lot of time and money to do it. And most people are just not interested in that. So you just have to evade those issues and start doing other things to forget it. Hate yourself, use drugs and alcohol, put a lot of reliance on religion and going to heaven, things of that nature, and hoping you can integrate with the people that have told you who you used to be in their turn.
I can become more like them.
That's right. That's your alternative.
And trying to become more like someone who doesn't want you to be like them is a daunting challenge.
Very difficult. It will not happen. Because if you get to the point where they would see that it's happening, you're going to have some major shifts. Those so-called liberals that pretend that they love you, going to put you on the side. And they have a word for that called benign neglect. And the others that hate you are going to continue to castigate you to the point where you start hating yourself more. And they will distance themselves from you. And that's what I'll be talking about on my show later on this week. How you will get to the point where you think you're close to equality, you're close to equity, and you will find that people you love will start treating you like a stepson that you didn't even recognize when he was born for the first 30 years of his life. And then when he shows up at your funeral, the whole family is disturbed because most of them heard about him or heard about her. And here he or she is, disturbing the status quo of the family.
Wow. Now, Doc, let me, in my search for knowledge and truth, and that truth is a mighty powerful word, because truth no one. We then say that Africans then were the first people that inhabited the earth, and then that would have been like God's oldest son.
I can go along with that. Historically, that is correct, because over 95% of the major authors throughout the world during that period said that the origin of man came from the continent of Africa. And you know, Africa now has 55 different nations. I'm not talking about states, but nations, totally independent with their own military and on and on and on, but they're almost totally worthless economically as far as the resources they're getting to feed their own citizens.
Well, we're going to talk about that, because having 55 nations guarantees that you'll never be able to get much accomplished, because there's no unity in 55 different nations. And then there's no unity in all of the various Indian tribes that existed. And so history tells us that that lack of unity has caused or created the demise that they experienced. I don't see any various tribes in the European nation. I don't see where there is a difference there, or they don't associate themselves with one another. I see that religion creates some differences in the Catholics and the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims. I see the divide that shows up inside of religion. But Europeans have not divided themselves. They remain united as an ethnic group.
That's a fact. And it's by design. They know if they don't stay together, others going to take over. So they will pretend they don't like each other. They will protest one's idea about conservatism or what we call the liberal philosophy of life. But when it comes to unifying themselves, they're going to get behind their own culture, their own language, and usually their own race, and practice what we call white supremacy.
And that should be an example for other ethnic groups to follow.
That's exactly right, and that's what black folks ought to do worldwide. Every area where the black people in the world, every area where they're in the majority, starting on the precinct level, the county level, the city level, the regional level, the state level, and internationally, they ought to control themselves in education and training, economic development, religion, politics, and leadership. And if you don't do that by pooling your resources in all areas, economic, politically, socially, religiously, and training your own leaders, you have this chaos we have today among the so-called black leaders worldwide. I'm saying worldwide. They're basically the same. They're being controlled by outside interests, outside special interest groups. And when you control by others, and they put that money on you and pay things for you, you don't have enough energy to think about getting away from that and pooling your own resources with your own people and controlling the areas where you are in the majority. You want to include everybody then. All the other so-called minorities in the world are in your area. The Hispanics, the lesbians, all the LGBT people, all the Jews, all the immigrants, any other group that come along there. Black Lives Matter people.
Well, I get that, Doc.
Put them over you.
I get that. But that's because we are divided and fragmented.
Of course.
And this old thing about how do you put Humpty Dumpty back on the wall? How do you put black people back together? How do you get them from 50 nations in Africa to one nation? How do you get them to be a unified force in wherever they are? When we'll have slogans like the Jews have when they say never again, and everybody, when you say never again, everybody recognizes that that's a Jewish slogan that says this will not happen ever again in life.
But it always happens. But you have to promote that. You have to advertise that worldwide. You will always have it happening again because of God's seasonal changes. things going to happen over and over and over until mankind disappears because we hate each other as human beings, and we are not going to promote peace. I don't care who says it. And if it comes from the higher power, he knows it's not going to happen because he predicted that there's a time for everything and a season for everything, and you can expect the good and the bad to be working, interconnecting all the time. And that is exactly what has been happening ever since we had three people on earth. When we had this God and his two creations, Adam and Eve. Because when you had God and Adam, man wasn't happy then.
Now, Doc.
Yeah.
Now, Doc, I cannot fathom the concept that a planet now that has 7 billion people on it came from two people. I just can't see how two people can produce 7 billion people. And so we want to get to the truth. We want to get to the truth, Doc. And so there are some things, that misconceptions that we have to deal with. Now, there are differences in people. There are Asians, there are Indians, there are Africans, there are Europeans. There are differences in people, and I can't believe they all came out of Adam and Eve. I just can't see how that's possible.
Well, allegedly, it is the fact of life, but it could not be. It all depends on what books you have read, what brainwashing you have been given throughout the years, and who wrote that information. Usually, the one that's in the power at the time, economically, politically, and socially, going to determine the history of their rule. And if you do not determine your own history as you being the victor, you are mentally ill. Most people in the world, except certain people that I'm not going to name, going to say, I invented that. I invented the cotton gin. Allegedly, Eli Whitney invented. And I guess he had never picked a bowl of cotton in his life. And I bet some black person invented that cotton gin so he can tell boss, look, boss, I got something for you that's going to save you millions of dollars. And then he got what old Dr. Claude Anderson called that meritorious manumission. I done made the boss some money. He's going to give me favorite status now. You know Eli Whitney didn't invent no cotton gin. That boy was somewhere in college and studying theology or something.
So the truth keeps evading us. It keeps creating this desire to learn and grow the truth, to seek the truth. I do know this, Doc. When you break a link in a family structure, it is a devastating experience. A young boy that grows up without a father, we act as if that's normal today.
It is normal.
We don't seem to understand the devastation that has just occurred in that transaction. If you don't know your daddy, you don't know who you are.
That's a fact.
You don't know why you act like you act. You don't know where you came from. You don't have no legacy.
That's why man created God, the number one superpower in the world that created all man. You know, man doesn't know that, but you have to give that proclamation to someone. Who is the chief? Who is the king of the world? Who made man? No man knows, in the past nor in the present. But you declare it to be someone and tell others that's the way it is until someone come in with another theory.
Well, no one has declared anything that I can find that's positive about me.
Well, that's
and so that's what I'm talking about. You can declare something and you can decide that you, as King James, summoned his folk up and they wrote the great book. Mm-hmm. Well, no one wrote in the great book that I was a great person. Doc,
well, they're not supposed to. The Europeans got together and put that book together. Now, if Africans had gotten together and put it
well, why didn't the Africans get together and put together the book?
Because they were subservient at that time to the Europeans. Now, they were in their own little areas, fighting against each other, moving around on the continent, trying to take over territory because they needed more food. The weather was getting bad, had climate change, where the desert was taking more and more land. And then when you moved down in my little territory, down in the valley, close to the Nile, where you had a lot of food and nice fat people eating everything they could eat, just wonderful nation, I didn't want you coming in there, taking over my space, nor did I want you integrated with my males and females, because when you have a tendency to get man in a new location with new males and females, they're going to have an interest in interconnecting, even though it might be against the law. But that's going to mess up the race, according to the people in power at the time, and very seldom, when you look at history, did the leaders in charge during any period promoted integration, unless they wanted to eliminate a certain group.
Now, Doc, no one wants to integrate their race. No one wants to dilute their strength. I mean, let's just be real. I mean, we know Hitler was crazy. He had this warped concept and this idea of this Puritan deal, and so we know he was crazy for that. But when you go back then and look at nature, and you see how God created it, I see a distinct separation in the species. And I think black folk ought to be proud to be black folk. I don't think that they ought to need to be integrated, to have a history and a legacy, and to be proud of who they are and what they have done, which far surpasses anything that any other group has done. And see, that's the link right there. That's the missing link. What African Americans have achieved is far greater than any other group in history, but yet we have no knowledge of who we are and where we come from.
Well, let me tell you what I think the problem is. The problem is, subconsciously, black people know that they are great. Black people know their history to the point where we have always been despised throughout the world since the 14 or 1500s. And we have never had mass starvation in Europe, in America, at any time, even during the Depression, when black folks were treated worse than dogs. You never heard of mass starvation. Black people have been able to make it in all of the diverse situations, I don't care whether it's economic, political, social, whatever, and they know secretly that there is something about me. I'm a special person, I'm a privileged person, and others tell me that I'm not, but I see that I can survive, and these others know that, and they are going to constantly teach you just the opposite. And they do it by miseducation, by forcing their customs on you and their traditions and their laws and rules, and telling you you have a limit. And when you get up to the limit, which is 50%, you are going to be curtailed, and I'm going to whip you back into your position where you're supposed to be, which we called in the Old South, currently, your place. You don't get beyond your place in society, religiously, socially, economically, in leadership specifically. If you do, I'm going to whip you in place.
Now, Doc, and that can occur because of the broken links that we have in our group. That can occur because it feeds the division, and it does not allow us to mount a self-determination strategy. We don't need to attack any other group.
Of course not.
That is not what needs to happen. But what needs to happen is that black folk need to know how to take care of themselves. And we have continued to lose the ability to take care of ourselves.
That's because, Mr. Socrates, we allow others to choose our leaders. Now, you will find that there are certain black people know their situation is not good. But if someone will offer them enough incentives, they will support someone that will destroy them. For instance, if you're a major Republican or Democrat, and you want to go and get a new group to come in and support you, All you have to go around and do is look at your chosen leaders, the ones you appointed to be in so-called leadership position, and encourage them to support you. And you have to give them more than now $50 in fried chicken. And if you can do this, which you can, you will still be able to divide and conquer. That's the history of mankind. They did the Hispanics that way. You know, the European Hispanics don't like the so-called South American Hispanics. Those from Cuba, you know, don't like to deal with those others from Mexico and others that are not European.
So where do we get this hatred? How did this hatred get embedded in one's soul, in one's psyche? How is it that you can come to not like another human?
Well, it's because the economic, political, and social whip, WHIP. You have to whip it in them, work it in them, tell them you are totally worthless, and say, I am the king in this realm. And
so where do you think this all began? Now, I go all the way back, and one of my proudest role models, I go all the way back to Hannibal. I just love thinking about the fact that he was able to scale the mighty Alps with elephants and soldiers in the middle of the winter to take on Rome. I just, that's like Jackie Robinson to me when he stole home base against the Yankees. That's like Muhammad Ali when he was the champion of the world. Those kinds of examples I need to feed on, because it tells me what? It tells me that I need to get up. I need to get at it, because I too can overcome and I can be great. And so I need those stories as much as I can. Now, somewhere along the line, after Hannibal, things started to change a little bit, and I keep running to this issue of the Pope. Now, this one has got me somewhat puzzled in terms of when religion began to become the power that it has and the influence that it has, and it seems to have started in the Roman Catholic Church with the Pope. Now, when we come back after this commercial, I want to know if you can share with me, how did the Pope come to such a position of power?
We can do that.
We're going to break now and go to this commercial, after which we will be right back.
Are you of becoming an entrepreneur, but you're not sure where or how to start? At Entrepreneurs Academy 101, our online program will guide you step by step on how to start and grow your own business. We offer courses such as how to write a business plan, how to create a budget, and so much more. Our online training program is designed for you to learn at your own pace, and there's no set order to complete this program. Because our academy is online, you have the choice to learn with a group, with friends, or individually. Upon completion of the entire curriculum, you will receive a certificate of achievement to acknowledge that you have completed the training needed to become a successful entrepreneur. So enroll today to design the life that you love. Contact your entrepreneur coach, Brenda Myers, at 601-672-0695, or visit our website at www.entrepreneursacademy101.com for more information.
Welcome back to Socrates Garrett Live. If you're watching us on Facebook, then we want you to share this program with your friends and family. We want you to send us some stars and become a fan. If you're watching us on YouTube, we want you to subscribe to our program. We'd love to have you as a new subscriber. We're growing every day. And I've noticed that We Believe now has more followers and more subscribers than many of our larger churches in our community. That tells me that people are listening, that Americans get their information and their news a different way. We know now that, our reach is effective because we are growing. So if you're watching us on YouTube, go on and to subscribe. Enjoy all of the shorts and the reels that we're putting out through social media as well. Now, if you're watching us on WeBelieveDigital.com, you'll see that we're just a little bit different. We have a lot of categories there that you can watch various programs of your interest at any time that you want to. No longer are Americans and the world population being tied to a 6 and 10 hour when somebody tells them they can watch the news. We watch the news now when we want to. We watch the news at our leisure. We're not tied to it anymore. When I watch a football game, if I want to watch it live, even though it's in the fourth quarter, I just start it at the beginning. I have the option to do that now, and technology does that. So we are a streaming service. We are a broadcast network that brings you some of the highest quality podcast shows, along with some of the best radio playlist content in the world. And so many times you will hear these shows on our podcast that's visible on YouTube and Facebook and We Believe Digital, but on the next day or so, you'll hear the audio version of that program over on We Believe Radio. We'll strip the audio, post it on the radio station, and allow you to enjoy that program again. Times have changed. Leadership has to change. New ideas, new concepts, new ways of doing things have to change. And this change levels the playing field for those that have been on the bottom all of their lives. For example, now with the internet, we here at We Believe Digital can compete with NBC. We can be seen in Gaza. We can be seen in China. We can be seen all over the world, just like they can. Now we can get our content out. We can get content in. You can share with us your ideas and your concepts. And many of you are just off the chain with your comments. Some of your comments are difficult for us to absorb and understand and without becoming angry, but you have a right to your comments and your philosophies and your ideas. And Dr. Henderson has said many times if he was in power, he wouldn't change a thing. It would take a fool to give up the quality of life and the way of living that they've enjoyed all of their life to someone else without a fight. So we understand the struggle to maintain. But you cannot keep your foot on one's neck forever. You can't hold a man in the ditch without getting in the ditch with him. And that's what has happened in Mississippi. We are all in the ditch together. We are last together. The rest of the world is laughing at all of us together. To my white brothers and sisters out there, in Mississippi, we have some of the most diverse populations in the world. There are more mulattoes in Mississippi. There are more mixed families in Mississippi than anywhere else in the country. We don't have the need or the right to hate one another in Mississippi. If anywhere in the world, we should gravitate to one another. Now, let's forget about the Civil War and the slavery and all of those atrocious things that occurred that should be in our past, but is not. But it continues to be prevalent in today's society, and that's why we can't get past this. Now, I was asking my co-host, how did we come to hate one another, and when did this begin? And I mentioned to him that in my studies, in my reviews now, there is something here that occurred with the creation of the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church that we need to take a look at and see what kind of influence do they have in the world, what kind of influence do they currently have in the world, and how is that influence benefiting or denying opportunities to other groups. Dr. Henderson.
Yes.
I don't know exactly if it's true or not, but I believe that in the pecking order of life, there's God, there is the President of the United States of America, and there's the Pope, the three most powerful forces in the world. Would you agree?
Well, partially. They are very dominant, of course. They have always been. But you must understand, when you have powerful forces, there's always at the beginning an idea or a philosophy that's going to be generated in the minds of a small group. And since they want to be powerful, they will talk about this, write about it, and share this information for sometime 50 to 100 years, and then there will be a change in the philosophy of the so-called power people. You can see it in America, you can see it in Russia, China, in all the places where the Republicans right now are very combative. Democrats in Mississippi can't go across the street and work together. You know, they're constantly changing leaders. They having different philosophies. They don't channel their voting patterns and strategies together, statewide or nationwide. They haven't changed their philosophies in the last 150 years. They stand for usually the same thing, both parties, the Democrats and Republicans.
Now, Doc, help me understand the power and influence of the Pope, and when did he come into power?
Well, the Pope has always been in power since they started many years ago, but they really got strong in the 15th and 16th centuries. Now, the Pope was always delegated to the religious side of the people's lives, even though many of them were very corrupt. They had wives and a lot of children. They were very war conscious. And then you had the what I call the kings and the queens. And of course, they always fought with the Pope for power. Then you had that other group, that little group that I told you earlier, that were called the noble people, and many of those sided with the kings and the queens, and some decided to go along with the Pope's agenda. And that kept wars in Asia, Africa, Europe, even today. And they've been fighting for a long time, but now you find that the Europeans, the Pope, have decided to get together, and they've been doing this since about the 17th century, and they work together. You find now the kings and the queens and the popes, they run three things. They run the government, they have domination over the military, and the court systems. Everywhere the military goes, the religious priest or the cardinal or some religious person is with those soldiers to make them feel that they're doing the right thing. It happened when you were in the military. It happened during the Roman Empire. And those soldiers are to be told by the supporters of the religious denominations that those soldiers that are killing, knowing it's wrong, they're doing it for democracy. They're doing it because it's the right thing to do, and they don't have to worry about being punished because they're going to be given grace by God.
Now that's powerful for a person that can declare that. I'm beginning to understand in my readings that the Pope was very instrumental and very supportive of the invasion of Africa.
Of course, because I told you many times, the Europeans were catching a hard time economically and socially for years during the 15th and 16th and early 17th centuries. You had a one-sided government. The king were supreme. The queens were supreme. And the Pope had an interest in being number 3, number 2, and number 1. These three shift all the time. And they finally decided we're going to get together. Look at the history of the church, for instance. They had hundreds of religious wars. The kings and queens had their own wars, fighting against each other in Europe, Asia, Africa. And then they get to the point where they spend most of their monies, and then they sit down and have a truce and say, we didn't quite beat them, but we got them to the point where they can't be competitive, so we're just going to divide up this land. They did Africa like that. They did the same thing in Europe. They did the same thing in Asia, India, all over the world, Latin America, and they took part of those countries and they took their status away from the people and called them non-people, non-entities, and gave them a lot of bad names and taught it to them through miseducation that you are not significant, I am superior to you, and I want you to understand that because I determine your destiny from birth to death through education and how I give you jobs and what I feed you to eat. And if you don't do it, you won't have any education at all, you will not have adequate food, and your job will be the most menial job I can find for you, and you better not try to get out of these three spheres of influence. Now, that's historical.
And so the only way that you can control people, you have to have some greater influence to be able to control a man's life. I'm reminded of the people that went to Jonestown and they drank the Kool-Aid with Jim Jones. They drank the Kool-Aid, Doc, because they were told that it was time for them to drink the Kool-Aid and died, laid down their lives and died because they were told that that much influence over their brain had been put in place. Religion. Now, I don't know what the largest number of religions are. We talked about the Roman Catholics a bit, but I'm not sure if they have more members than the Muslims or the Christians. Or
no, they don't.
They don't. So they're smaller in size. And so
they have more power, collective power. Now, the Muslims have more power than most of the religions. And if you mess around and let those different Muslim-type religions get together, you would have a new world order in no time.
Well, I'm not sure what a new world order means for me, so I'm not sure that I'm in favor of that.
Okay, I hope you're not.
I'm not. But, you know, the Muslims may be powerful, but I remember that Jesus started out with 12 followers.
That's correct.
And today he's got 3 billion followers.
Exactly.
That's pretty progressive.
And they're moving in and out of his sphere all the time for various reasons. So if 200,000 or 300,000 Christians leave the Christian faith, they usually call themselves another name. I call it some kind of cult. And they still pretend that they are the real Christians. They're not like those others. They're not like the Methodists, the Presbyterians, the Baptists. We are the real Christians. And all of them from the same so-called Christian faith, the same old Catholics. Started with the Catholics as the most predominant religion in the world during the 14, 15, 1600s. And then they broke off with a guy named Martin Luther when he decided one day that the Catholics are not right. They have a different philosophy than mine.
What happened to Martin Luther?
Well, he ended up dead. I'm not talking about Martin Luther King. I'm talking about
I know who you're talking about.
Right, he ended up dead, despised. But when they got rid of him...
I think he was beheaded.
He was messed over.
Yeah.
By the government and by the religious critics. But that made his religion stronger. Whenever you kill the leader, you usually doing his or her philosophy a disservice. You don't go and kill the leader. You're supposed to do like some of the Europeans are doing in America. They didn't want to kill all the black leaders that were protesting for so-called civil rights. So they killed the strongest ones, and they put the other group in prison in solitary confinement for 30, 40, 50, 60, and 70 years. And then those moderates that were seeking integration and the allegation that we were for citizens, they gave them jobs with local, state, and federal government or left them alone. See, you break them up, you split them, and then you don't have to kill everybody.
Now, we're going to come back to that. We're going to move on. We're going to come back to that on our next show.
Okay.
Because there's some work that we got to do. I just want to remind the viewers out there that when you break that link between a man's father and the son, you have created a devastation in that life of that child that is far greater than anything we could ever imagine. When you break a man away from his natural culture, his natural religion, his history, his legacy, his country, you have, in fact, destroyed the inner man in a way that's almost non-repairable. And we're going to come back and we're going to deal with those issues in a minute. But we're going to shift gears now because this is the election day in the state of Mississippi, and the world is watching Mississippi. And the results ought to be coming in shortly. And there are going to be a lot of winners and there are going to be a lot of losers. So I want to talk a bit about this election cycle. Dr. Henderson.
Yes, sir.
We have a very highly contested, contentious race for the governor of the state of Mississippi.
You think so?
I do think so. I think there's been more money spent than any other time in this race, and I think that Democrats and African Americans feel that they have a real chance of defeating an incumbent Republican governor in a red state.
You believe that?
I believe African Americans believe that.
Well, let me tell you the real fact. Now, I've been talking about this and asked about this for several months. And on another show on Wednesday, we have already done the research and we put the list together as to who the governor will be in Mississippi and the reasons why. And I'm not going to announce that tonight because people still have a few voting minutes left. I bet some are still in the line. Because if you get there before 7 p.m., you can stay until 8 or 9 if you're in the line. So we're not going to talk about who the winner, but I know who the winner is and know why he is going to be the winner. And I will announce it on Wednesday on another show.
Wow. Well, I guarantee you that the world is waiting to know who will win in the state of Mississippi.
Well, they're going to find out tonight about midnight. But
yeah, the polls will close in 8 minutes.
That's right.
In 8 minutes, the polls will close. Now, Doc, there's been a black lady, Angela Cockerham, a member of the legislature, that has come and support Tate Reeves for governor. And she's being talked about in a way that it's got to be hard for her and her family to deal with.
Oh, I bet it's not. Now tell me this. I know the answer, but I'm going to let you tell me. Is she a Republican or a Democrat?
She's a Republican. I mean, she is a Democrat, I'm sorry.
Okay. In name, right? She represents the Democrats.
Well, actually, she may have moved to declared herself an independent.
Well, that's what she's supposed to do. If you have a leaning towards the other side, it is smart, you'll be smarter to declare yourself an independent versus a member of the other group until you can get all the resources you need, and then you can come up with a very good reason why you want to leave your party. And that's the way they do it. A smart politician, unless he's already been in council with the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the Speaker of the House, would just automatically declare himself a Democrat or a Republican if they leave one of those parties. They don't do it that way because they want to be promised something and want to be guaranteed that they're going to get something politically, economically, or a position of responsibility, like an appointment where you can get paid for years, and then you sell yourself to the highest bidder. Nothing wrong with that. That's illegal. You don't go to jail for that.
Now, is it immoral?
Well, some say it is.
Well, this is America. We have a freedom of choice. We ought to vote our conscience. We ought to vote for what we think is best for your country, your community, and your family. Is it possible that this young lady is ahead of her time?
Well, no. she is not ahead of her time because she is doing nothing new. Now, most of the Democrats and most of the Republicans have been in other camps that's alive today. During my time, early years, up until about the mid-1960s, most of the white Europeans in Mississippi and in the South were Democrats, most of them. Most of the blacks in Mississippi and in the South, right after slavery, up until about the 1930s, were Republicans. And now there's that shift. So this lady is just doing what they always did. She had a reason to change her mind. She felt that she was probably not using her strategies and her inner feelings about economic development in the state, social problems, or it might have been other reasons. One might have picked up on some of her alleged weaknesses and what I call attitudes about certain things. You have to study people from a distance before you approach them to find out whether you can get them in your camp or not. You have to feed them certain things.
So should African Americans despise black Republicans
No.
in the state of Mississippi?
You don't have to say it anymore. No. Why should they do that? You have so many thousand black Republicans in Mississippi that's not even saying they are Republicans till it's a shame. You'll be surprised how many blacks going to vote Republican tonight up until 7 o'clock. You'll be surprised how many so-called white moderates are going to vote Republican that used to be Democrats, and some say they are Democrats. But most of those people are going to vote in their interests. And the few that don't, not going to tell you who they voted for. They're going to say that's a secret ballot. But most people that want to be accepted want to go in the area where most of their people are because of educational opportunities, because of jobs and positions of responsibility. You will be a fool to go and declare yourself voting for someone in another camp, and you got to survive economically from the people you left. It just doesn't work that way. You have to be prepared to go to another nation or another state in order to survive economically, if you can get out before you are killed.
Now, blacks, Democrats, and have controlled the local elections and the local government and the school boards and the county, the cities for a long, long time in Jackson, Mississippi. And the progress of the African American community is less than desirable. Now, that could be for several reasons. That could be that the stronghold of the European community on black leadership and the denial of the resources will keep them impoverished and broken to a point that it brings them to their knees. Or it could be ineffective leadership. What say you?
I say both. If I were in power in an area at one time in the past, and I had my great leaders as my idols, and I put up their statues all over my area of domain so I can, what I call it, set it up to a point where I identified through their statues and my flags and other things that that's our territory or my territory or my group's territory. That's what you're supposed to do.
I don't see any black statues, Doc, and this is why I'm having problems. I don't see anything when I walk out of my door in the morning that reminds me that God's on my side, that the community, the black community is on my side, that the white community is on my side. I don't see any of that.
You're not going to ever see that unless you start looking at the reality. You have to say, I'm going to pool my resources where I am in the majority, identify and select my own leaders, and train them and put them in responsible positions, and you will have what you're looking for. But if you allow the outside interests to train your leaders and financially support them, and you don't, and you go and buy a Cadillac, or something else with your money, you will never gain any real power. You have to train your own children to do what you expect them to do.
So we'll know tonight whether or not the pendulum has swung in favor of the Democrats or whether the stronghold of the Republicans will remain in place for another 4 years.
Oh, I can almost say you're correct. Now, there's a little tidbit there where they have so many voters that they are not going to be able to count tonight. You know, a lot of absentees and all kind of things. If it's a real close vote, like 49 on both sides, 49%, you might have a surprise after they count all the other votes. Because all the votes are not going to be counted tonight. You know, they have thousands more than they've had in a long time that they're going to have to count after today. And I think the law says, I believe they have about 7 days to count all those votes. But usually, if one wins tonight with 50.5%, almost 51%, he or she will possibly win that position they're running for, regardless of those other votes that's not counted.
Well, in the governor's race, contentious race, we have Governor Tate Reeves that's battling Brandon Presley, young man who claims he's the second cousin of Elvis Presley. And there's been a lot of money that's poured into this race. And people say that it's a very, very tight race. And in fact, the governor could be defeated.
You don't say.
Yes.
You're right. People are saying it. I've been reading it.
Yes. And so we're watching that race. Then on the next race, and I want to just say this, to African-American statewide candidates out there, it's been very difficult, and we have not had an African-American to win a statewide race in the state of Mississippi since Reconstruction.
That's a fact.
That is a real shame. Now, but we have 4 candidates out there. We have Mr. Bradford out there that's running for state auditor, young man that's sharp as he can be, that's offered himself up. We have Ty Pinkston out there that's running as well. We have candidates that are running for the Agricultural Commissioner. We have candidates that are running for state treasurer. So we have 4 or 5 African-American candidates that are running for statewide office. But we've not had a winner since Reconstruction.
Well, do you consider this period in Mississippi history part of Reconstruction?
This period here?
That's right.
No, I don't.
Well, then, why do you think something's going to happen different unless there's some Reconstruction going on? You think the status quo is going to make a shift in state leadership? Of course not.
Wow.
It doesn't work that way, sir. You win in office by votes, rigged or regular votes.
Well, I hope that Mississippi will change the error of its ways and understand that as long as they deny black folk an opportunity to become a full first-class citizen with all of the rights and the privileges and the opportunities that go along with being a full first-class citizen, as long as they deny that, Mississippi will remain last.
Let me tell you the problem. The European Mississippians and nationwide know that if you believe that you are not doing what you're supposed to do because you are denied, they are smiling right now. But if black people decide in any precinct where they're in the majority that I'm going to determine my destiny from birth to death by pooling my resources and by training my leaders and supporting them, I can win starting on the precinct level, and in 4 years, I will have a state governor, whether it's Republican or Democrat. And if I would go and integrate the parties, as we did in the past, in 4 years, we will have the party dominated to the point where the other people that dislike us or despise us will leave that party And then during that shift, you can take over for a while. You see, it happens in history. Well, it happened with the Republicans and the Democrats earlier.
Well, I can say this. If African Americans are denied an opportunity to participate in this government, if we don't have a single victor, a single candidate that represents the ideas and the strategies and philosophy and the position that things need to change for the least of us, if we don't have a single candidate that wins tonight, there has to be a new strategy.
Well, you're exactly right. And I don't want to say it. This is after 8 o'clock.
It's after 7 o'clock.
Well, I'm going to tell you. You named some certain names in certain positions, and I'm not going to be specific, but none of those that you mentioned will be statewide winners tonight.
Doc, our time is up. I say it and I'll say it again. If we don't enjoy any success this year in these elections, and we always saying these are the most important elections of all time, that's correct. That's true. If we don't enjoy any success this time, there has to be a new philosophy, a new strategy. And I'm going to be one of the authors, and I hope you'll join me, in crafting a new strategy for African Americans that will win for their communities.
Within a 4-year period, you can start on the precinct level, and within 4 years, you will have a statewide black candidate or any group's candidate. If you start on the local level, pool your monies, your other resources, and select your own leaders and train them. And when you do that, all you have to do is use what we call, and people don't like to use this word, the propaganda necessary to show that this new man, this new change is going to benefit you. And you have to stop doing what you used to do. And you will have a change within 4 years politically.
So we're going to come back after this show, and we're going to recap this election. And if we don't have the success that we think is proper and fitting for African Americans, we're going to start the write-ins of a new strategy for the African American community in Mississippi. We're going to have to create a new method, a new way of thinking, a new policy that governs the African American community. Now, our time is out, and we're running up against another show. So, Doc, any parting words?
Well, my parting word is, ladies and gentlemen, there's a season for everything. And your season will come, and only come, when you identify yourself as a new man, where you pool your resources and train your own leaders after you select them in your churches, in your schools, in your communities, and you let the outside agitators and special interest groups keep their money, and you'll be able to win any election.
You heard it here on We Believe. This has been Socrates Garrett with Socrates Garrett Live. We want you to stay safe, and good night.
Looking for the hottest content in the city of Jackson and surrounding areas? Check out WeBelieveDigital.com. Also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. We Believe Digital Podcast is here for all your podcasting needs.